We are headed to Brighton, Colorado to go to the Brighton Historical Society, Stories of Elmwood Cemetery. To give you a little history on Brighton, the first irrigation ditch was filed in 1862 for farming rights. Then the Hughes Stagecoach Station was established in 1862. In 1871, the railroad, Boulder Valley Railroad, was completed to Brighton. In 1881, the city of Brighton was completed and named after founder Daniel Carmichael's wife, Hugh. Daniel Carmichael was railroad man and filed the first plot for Brighton. The residence was used as the first courthouse and the basement used as a jail on 34 South 5th Street. In 1904, the first annual fair was held at the current City Hall. In 1913, scarlet fever epidemic caused all public meetings to be postponed. In 1920, the coldest winter and heaviest snow in 7 years occurred. 500 head of cattle died and electricity and water was off for 3 days. Later, Hughes Station was named Brighton after Brighton Beach, New York. We will be learning about the Bromley family. Emmett Bromley, an early settler who came to Colorado in 1877. He was the first sheep and livestock owner in Colorado. The farm began with 200 acres in 1883, also holding deputy sheriff and deputy assessor. Then owned by the William O. Roberts family after Bromley's death in 1922. A large community of Japanese families settled in Brighton, especially after World War II. And the Hishinumas farmed Fort Lupton and Bar Lake, then the Bromley farm in 1947. Yashi and wife Sen and 11 children. Now on the historic places, and won the Hart Award for its rehabilitation in 2018. Also, the Foley Farm. Orrin Foley worked for Emmett Bromley for 16 years before purchasing his own farm to supply and produce to the local canning and manufacturing facilities. Orrin and Rosa Foley moved to Brighton in 1894 and had 7 children. 4 sons who served in World War I. We happened to miss the Troyer auction on this same day, but we'll be back in the spring to film and take tours of the farm, explore Bar Lake, and see the Troyer auction in April. Hello, my fellow cemeterian friends. Today we are here at the lovely Elmwood Cemetery here in Brighton, Colorado. We're having a cemetery walk today. We're gonna go walk and talk to some famous people hear the families from Brighton, Colorado, and hear their stories and see where they rest. So come along with me and just listen to some stories, and I'll also put some pictures and little snippets of certain places in Brighton so we can see the history. Big Carmichael Lakes were. And they had a resident who told them that they heard this tap, tap, tap on their window, and they heard a voice whispering, "Help them, they're drowning." Well, see, even though the twins' story was almost forgotten, I think some of the people that were around here, especially the elderly, because they're, around the area where the tragedy happened, they would have these experiences, and because they're still haunted and they're self-conscious about this tragedy. So, like I said, I could not find the lakes anywhere. I spent about 10 years looking for a map of where they were. I would ask all the people I knew in Brighton, do you know where Little and Big Carmichael Lake were? And, you need a chair? Oh, you got one on your... So, and they would say no, but I did find this at the Adams County Museum, and if you look really close, there's two little reservoir lakes here, but they have the name Skeel on them, not Carmichael, which is one of the reasons I couldn't find it. And Skeel was Carmichael's brother-in-law, and they did a lot of real estate development together. So that's what that was about.
So was Carmichael given like the community, like, oh, that's Olin Carmichael's farm that we're calling it that lake? Is that how that came about?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because he had all that land. In fact, it was like right behind the old city hall, and then all the way back almost to Bar Lake. Well, you can tell on this map here. So, good question. So then another attendant was telling me at Brookdale that she has a lot of memory care patients over the year, and they didn't know each other, and plus they're memory care patients, right? So it's really hard to communicate and stuff. But this happened more than once in several years and months apart, several times. And she would hear a scream, and then she would go to find out from the resident, what's up, what can I do to help you? And they would say, help them, they're wet, get them a towel. So they also, in their subconscious, had kept that tragedy. But pretty much those retirement homes are where the lakes were. So let's talk about something more cheerful than that, but on the history. But let's talk about the boys. And their twins are identical, and they were fun-loving 11-year-old twins. They had a younger brother, Ken, who was 8. They had lots of neighborhood friends, lots, and tons of cousins. Their mother had 10 children in her family, so you can imagine how many cousins they had. And the identical twins were really close, and they liked doing the same thing. And their Aunt Norma was telling me that she took them for a bike ride one time around the block, and she could only take one twin at a time. She put them on the handlebar. So she put the first twin on the handlebars, and then she would take off around the block with the other twin standing there, and they're crying and crying. They were about 5 years old at this time. They wanted to go too. They wanted to do just what the other twin does, and so they cried. So then she comes back around the block, and she drops off the one twin, puts on the new twin. Same thing happens. The other twin starts crying. He can't go. He wants to go. She does this several times around the block, and they just kept taking turns crying, and they both wanted to go. But it was kind of a fond memory for her. So their Christian faith was very important to them. You see them dressed as all twins here for, St. August. And in fact, that aunt I was telling you about, Aunt Norma, she's a nun. And most of their family are really
faith meant a lot to them. In fact, she carried a smaller copy of this photo. She still carries it today in her wallet of the boys. So, when they were older, they liked it, like other 11-year-old boys, they liked to play ball. And there was a softball field close by, and so 5 of the kids got together. There were the 2 twins, Ronnie and Donnie, who were 11. There was Leroy, he's 13, and Leon Schmidt, he was 14. And then the twins' cousin's name is Herbert Butch Glein. He was 8. And so, like I said, they wanted to go play ball, but it was a really hot day, and one of the twins came up with an idea, let's go swimming. And the mother was devastated later because they weren't supposed to do that. But anyhow, they lived on 6, here's a picture of the house, on the corner of 6th and Brighton Street. And remember, this is more rural than it is now. So, you know where Benedict Park is? Anybody know that? It's about 2 miles away from it. So they rode their bikes to Benedict Park, and they went to the little lake, the little Carmichael Lake. And that was a fateful decision that would change not only the lives of those 5 boys, but their families and the community with a tragedy. So this is Butch, and this is Leroy and Leon, and they're with the sheriff after the incident. Okay, and they told this story to the sheriff. When they arrived, all the 5 of the boys stripped down to their shorts, and they climbed on this makeshift raft at I think it was the west side, the west shore. And a few minutes later, they brought back the little one, Butch, to shore. They thought, well, he's too little to be out here, so they took him back. And then on the second trip out, Leon, he was the only one that could swim of all the 5 boys. He got off the raft and he was swimming, beside the raft. And he looked up and he saw the twins, and I always get Leroy and the other one mixed up because he's a close name. Anyhow, I'll think of his name in a minute. Leroy Davis, yeah. Leroy Davis and the twins. All of them together moved to the back of the raft. Just like that, the tip went up in the front and they slid off into the water. And it was only 5 feet deep, but they were little guys. And so they were immersed in the water immediately. When they came out, there was a cry for help, and that Leon heard. And so he pushed the raft towards the little boys. And he said for some reason they just wouldn't grab on. And then there was another cry where one of the twins cried out, "Leon, help me." And so he swam over there to help the boy. Now this is before we all learned safety in the water. Remember, there's no lifeguards. Life is a different time. And so, the twin grabbed on to Leon and drug him under. He was in panic. Everybody was in panic. And he was basically drowning Leon. So he struggled to be free, and then he swam back to shore because he wanted to go get help. This is a picture of the rescue effort afterwards. And I'll pass this around. Here's some smaller ones that you can see up close too. He puts on his clothes, and remember, Butch is already there. So they get on their bikes. Now remember, they're out in the country. It's not country now. But they just sped on their bikes to ride back to the Schnell home to tell their mom to get help. There's no help along the way. It was like way far out there. And the sheriff was called. The mother was so hysterical, of course. And so a neighbor called the fire department for her, and then the fire department, or actually the sheriff, and then the sheriff called the fire department. But they went out to Big Carmichael Lake. So remember, there's 2 lakes. They didn't find anything, but then they went over to Little Carmichael Lake, and they saw the 3 piles of the clothes of the 3 boys. So they knew they were at the right place. They actually tried to resuscitate one of the boys, but by this time, they estimate he'd probably been underwater about 45 minutes. It was so sad. And tragically, it was too late for Ronnie and Donnie, who are here, and Leroy, who's down there with the yellow hat. And they all 3 perished in 5 feet of water. Sadly, this was just 5 days before they opened up the new pool. The one that was going to have lifeguards, the one that was going to be supervised, etc. It's been delayed all summer long. Everybody was in a lot of grief, and so they destroyed the raft immediately. Then they found 2 more rafts that I think some other boys who like to swim out there had brought. The rafts were kind of sturdy actually, but of course, you can't shift the weight on the rafts, was a problem. So then there was a move to transform that area, that rural area, into a park by Ray Benedict. Anybody know Ray Benedict? He was an advocate for the city and also a furniture store owner on Main Street. And so he wanted to have a park there, and they made a park, and it was named in his honor. Well, like I said, with this action, when they got rid of the lakes, the Carmichael name totally disappeared, the father of Brighton, from the city. And it wasn't until 37 years later that these kids in Mrs. Lindgrum's 2nd grade class wrote these letters to the council. They're like, Daniel Carmichael is really important. He needs something named after him. And so they named a trail after him, and in Benedict Park, the one that went around where Little Carmichael Lake was. But then they weren't really happy with that. That's hardly nothing. They'd really like something big, like a park named after him. And so they actually got all these signatures from all around town and submitted it to City Council. And I don't know, have anybody been to Carmichael Park? Because of these 2nd graders. And it was like, I think it was like 50 years. Yep. And July 4th, 2012, nearly 50 years after the father of Brighton's name almost completely disappeared from the city, that portion of land that he had originally donated, it was the fairgrounds, to the city, became Daniel Carmichael Park. And so I wanted to thank you for listening to the story of the Shell twins and those stories that you find here. And this is one I was thinking. Thank you. Get a bookmark or anything that's Thank you. Thank you. Okay, come on, honey. Thank you.
Back in Russia, things had gotten so ugly that Grandma's sister, they make a run for it. Their home is being burnt down. They end up spending nights in the forest. In 10 years, they would lose their home 4 different times. Germans shot at them. The Americans shot at them. The Germans burned down their home. They put them on a train to Russia. Russia sends them back. They get citizenship, and then after the World War, they try to send them back. So they put them in a concentration camp, hold them there for a short time, and put them on a train to go back. And what would be my great aunt jumps from, they jump from the train.
Kinda.
The husband would have killed them if they had landed on this side of the East Germany. He had a gun, he was going to kill him. Luckily, they landed in the West. So, the majority of my grandfathers, her aunts and uncles were basically murdered in Russia. So they died between 1929 and 1942. There was only 2 survivors that made it past that. So Juliana Height was born November 26, 1912 in Denver, and she was the second to the oldest. She was never expected to live because she had a hole in her heart. The parents kept a dress on hand for her to be buried in. Because of this, they didn't waste an education on Juliana. She only had a 3rd grade education. And in May, she marries Adam through an arranged marriage. He was a widower and he had just lost his wife and he had 1 child. They go on to have 13 more.
Ooh. How old was she when she got married? Sorry.
It doesn't say.
Oh, okay.
Well, she was born in 12 and she was 24, something like that. She had 13 children and 1 stepchild. They raised beets and dairy cows on a farm they owned just east of Brighton. Then tragedy struck. Adam dies in 1956. Life was hard. The family and farm survived because the children had to quit school. The older children quit school. The younger children had to work on the farm. So they went to school and had to work the farm. Julia loved her family and especially her many grandchildren. They played games and watched movies. Many of the warm memories were of the German sausage sandwiches with mustard. Julia lives to almost 90. She passes away in May of 2002. 4 of her children are currently buried here, one of which is right behind. The point of these stories is Julia's life would have been completely different if her parents had not migrated to the United States. She probably never would have seen her 30th birthday because the family was killed, most of the family was killed off in 1942, and a whole generation would not have been born. You never know when your government may turn on you. Be grateful you live in the United States and protect your freedoms. I am grateful and I'm blessed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have some pictures if you'd like to see. There is a Russian-German birth certificate from my grandfather. This was the family in 1915. This is Julia here. Her name was Juliana. I call her Aunt Julia, and they call her Julia.
So you gotta get to know her a little bit before she.
No, I knew her very well.
Oh,
I knew
good.
my aunts and uncles very well.
That is
and so this is the family in 1930, and you can. This is Juliana right here, and this is Juliana. A few years later, she gets married to Adam. Now here's the stunner of it. This is going on the same time. This is the grandmothers are what would be Julia's aunt.
Okay.
So it's the same time frame. Look at the conditions.
Yeah.
And this is the family that escaped between Russia and Germany. They ended up in Germany and stayed in Germany.
Did they thrive there?
Yes, they're still
awesome.
there.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tell me about your books.
Society out there from Russians from Germany.
Okay. That is awesome.
And that's how they like to be called. Like I said, they don't like to be called Russians.
hill. They called me Tiny because of my, most of my life I weighed over 300 pounds. I was born in Sullivan, Illinois in 1906 and grew up in the area, graduating from Sullivan High School. After graduating from high school, financial hardships forced me to go back to work and to help the family. So I had to quit college and go to work. I worked at a produce company and then drove a mule team. But I knew I was destined for better things. You might remember me as the band leader of Tiny Hill and the Hilltoppers. I was known as America's biggest band leader. We were considered the house band at the Melody Mill in Chicago. My band and I, more or less, were the official dance band at the Melody Mill and recorded the song Moonlight on Melody Mill. In addition to leading my band, I'm also an accomplished musician. I play the banjo, the drums, and the guitar. This lady next to me is my wife, Catherine.
Hi everyone. My friends call me Kathy, and I just want to say thank you all for visiting us today.
Catherine, why don't you tell these good folks about your early years?
Sure, Tiny. So I am former Catherine Pearson from Kansas City, Missouri. I was born in Joplin, Missouri, where I graduated from both high school as well as business college. I experienced some of my early success in life. First as the owner of a Kansas City used car lot, and then as an auditor at Sears and Roebuck and Company in Kansas City. So I first met Tiny here back in 1952 at the Moabach Hotel in Kansas City. We met again later on in life in Waterloo, Iowa in 1956 during a concert featuring Tiny as well as his orchestra. So we got married in Miami, not that Miami, it's Miami, Oklahoma, on March 7th, 1957. So then I became Tiny's third wife. His other wives were Alta Blystone as well as Jenny Lou Carson.
Well, I guess I saved the best for last here. During our time in show business, my band and I traveled thousands of miles and gained enormous notoriety. We played at many of the Army camps during and after the war. During our time together, the band and I released many popular songs like Dream Girl, Move It On Over, and Sioux City Sue. In 1939, my band and I released our signature song and hit, Angry, which I'd like to play for you right now. In addition to my music career, I really enjoy my Fleet of Packard automobiles. Some will tell you that I was a real tough negotiator when it comes to purchasing these cars. Well, that's a story for another time. My other passion was, believe it or not, cooking. I could not resist a good meal. In the early days, my mom would come on the road with us and cook. Does it show?
Wait, Tiny, aren't you going to tell them about our business ventures together, dear?
Oh, yes. Well, why don't you tell me?
Sure. So in 1950, Tiny purchased a 140-acre dairy farm right down the road in Fort Lupton, and he named it Mountain View. He also purchased a radio station that was located here in Brighton. So the K Hill studio was located on the corner of 4th and Bush Street.
I played my last show, so to speak, on December 13th, 1971, at the age of 65. I'm buried here in Elmwood, Section 19, Block 3, Grave 1 and 2. My wife died suddenly at age 41. Catherine, tell them about how you died.
Sure. Well, I was driving alone on Highway 85. I was following Tiny on the way back from our farm, located just south of Fort Lupton. Suddenly, I lost control of my car and ended up hitting a power pole. I was thrown from the car and killed. Tiny only found out later when he called authorities about my absence. I'm buried here at Elmwood, right next to Tiny.
Thank you all for coming, and we hope you enjoy hearing about our lives.
And then we have a picture. There's Tiny and Catherine.
That's good. And here's my promotional picture. Thank you, folks.
Thank you,
Appreciate
guys.
it.
Thank you. Good job,
you.
guys.
Thank you for sharing.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. Hello. Welcome. The wind is not cooperating today, so. I know. Well, I've got that one down there. That one's doing okay. The wind actually started coming from the north for a minute, but now it isn't. So we'll wait just another second. We got a couple more people today. And what's that?
Sorry.
Yes, there's a garden. That's a victory garden. That's a victory garden. Wrong era for this, but that's okay. It's pretty. And, you know, after you're done, if you'd like a tomato. So I'm talking about Emma Armington, and she's probably done something. She did something that no woman had ever legally done in the state of Colorado in 1893, and I'll get back to that. So Emma Armington was born about 1865, probably around the end of the Civil War. We're not 100% sure. She is buried somewhere here at Elmwood, but records have been lost. So, but she is buried somewhere around here. She was the wife of Colonel W.R. Armington, who was the head of what we like of the state militia at the time. That's what the armory. Have y'all been to the armory? That's where the guns and all that was kept for the army, and it was the state militia. Her husband was the state militia colonel. But he also did all kinds of other things. He was also a photographer. So as a photographer, he was also the coroner, because in the 1800s, the coroner needed to be a photographer. So often the photographer was the coroner. And so he was a coroner and a photographer. And he also put on plays at the Brighton Opera House, which was downtown. So Mrs. Armington, I helped him do with all that. I did all that. Well, not the coroner. I would not have been at that stuff. So this is the 1800s. But I helped with all the plays that he put on. I was actually one of the founding members of the Methodist Church here in Brighton and helped raise money for that. But what I'm best known is a suffragette. That's a woman who's working for votes for women. In 1877, the only people that could vote here in the state of Colorado were white men. No men of color at all, and absolutely no women. Only white men were allowed to vote. That's just the way it was. It was the times. So there were women that were called suffragettes, which is actually a derogatory term, but I'll explain that in a minute. But here in the United States, we called ourselves suffrages. I can't pronounce that. Anyway, women working for suffrage. And that is the suffrages working for the right for women to vote. In 1877, the legislature talked about it, but would not pass it to let women vote. And a couple of years later than that, a bill went through the legislature again. This time, they said women could vote in school board elections. Yay. But if you think about it, women were probably, they were the one having children and sending children to school, so it was important to be able to vote in a school board election. But we still, that was in about 1880. Then in 1893, there was something called the Panic of 1893. I've done a lot of research on this, and I'm not still entirely sure what it's about. It has something to do with silver and railroads and too much debt. And anyway, so a lot of people were out of work. Banks closed, mines closed. It was a terrible time. Thousands of people were out of work. So the suffragettes thought this was the time to try to push for women's suffrage. And in 1893, the legislature still would not pass a vote, let women vote, but they once again put it to the men of Colorado to let them vote. And this time in 1893, we finally got the right to vote. Yay! So in 1893, with Colorado being one of the first areas to vote. Now, some people say the first state, but there were other areas that weren't quite states yet. You could already vote in Wyoming, but I don't believe that was a state yet. You could vote here in Colorado as of 1893, and you could vote in Utah, but again, Utah was a territory. So anyway, but it is the first state that it was the people that gave women the vote. It was the vote by referendum. So in 1893, we were given the right to vote. And in 1894, me, Miss W.R. Armington, I cast the first legal vote here in the city of Brighton. So I am the first woman to vote in the city of Brighton. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but I think it's a big deal.
That's a big deal. Yes.
It is a big deal. So I cast it. Now, what I voted for, that I can't tell you. Records have been destroyed about the election in 1894.
Of course.
But in 1894, I voted for the first time. After that, we don't know a whole lot about the Armingtons. They kind of disappear into the annals of history. We know that at one point they got a divorce, and again, then they just kind of fade off in history. The last thing I have about them is that they enjoyed a weekend in the mountains. Because that's what newspapers, that was the form of social media back then. Was you go tell the reporter, hey, we went to the mountains last weekend. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm going to print that in the paper next week. So I like to think that Miss Armington probably wanders around here visiting people. I think she's blowing my signs down today. No, she's not. I'm sure it's whoever else is buried here who's not crazy about women's suffrage. But I think she especially is around about a month from now when we go to the polling places. So please vote as we will in about a month. It's important to vote, and it's important for women to vote as well. Don't just vote how your husband votes, unless you like your husband, the way he picks votes. Well, I hope you like your husband, but anyway. So,
That's what keep them around.
right. So here's some pictures. This is Mr. Armington, and this one of the ladies in this picture is Mrs. Armington. So, does anybody have any questions? Which is the word meaning letting women vote, and they called us suffragettes because putting "at" the end of a word is derogatory. Like a small kitchen is a kitchenette, a small dining room is a dinette.
You're not getting what you're thinking.
Right. So as you know, if we were just little women trying to, be snotty, then we were suffragettes. Which is why they didn't like to use that term here. But we had suffrage here in Colorado a full 25 years before the 19th Amendment in 1920. So Colorado was very progressive.
The baby only lived for 2 days because of the poison. It was a blood poison out of the kidneys. A deadly poison. This was a deadly poison. It was uncurable. Will not be cured. You take a chance. That's why I say this lady gave her all, even her life. The baby. Okay. 1929, little Phyllis died. One or the other was it going to make it.
Sorry, you're okay.
Dreams of
You're good.
both. But in 1929, little Phyllis Ann didn't make it. She lived for 2 days. But Cardella made it. After delivering this baby, the poison was really getting just really escalating to the point where you didn't make a chance to. You can stop and probably live longer, or if you have a baby, you can kill the baby, you can kill both of you, or what? It's just a chance you take. She self take a chance. but she wanted a baby so bad. So in 1930, she gave birth to William. And William was very lightheaded. You notice, William lived to be an old man, 84 years old. But what happened? William was born in 1930, a healthy boy. Healthy. Cardilla didn't make it. She lived 4 days after the birth. Because like I said before, if somebody's not going to make it, it costs Cardilla to have the love of her life. It cost her life. Now after Bill was born, Barry tried to raise little Bill. But he also died in 1933. He was a miner. And miners developed that lung disease in the mines. So he passed away. Now here's little Bill, 3 years old, no parents. So the Conger family here were friends of the family. They were family friends. And they adopted Bill. At 3 years old, they adopted him. And they raised him. So during that time, Bill took the Conger name. That's where that Conger name comes from. His name is William Chalker. And this is his wife over here, Jane Lynn. She's nice to be living like me. And what I'm trying to say on this story that I have here, when I was doing the research on the story, I walked the area to see what I could pick up. And to me, this is a heartwarming story of a family that stayed together over here, and of a mother, a lady, that wanted the baby so bad that she gave her life. And she did. But God granted her a boy. She got her wish before she died, which is really neat. I mean, she took the chance and won, because the doctor says, because in 1930, that rheumatic poisoning, it was out of the kidneys. It goes off, it gets in your blood. You're done. Take the chance. Go for it. It's like throwing the dice, I guess. I'm going for it. And she did, and she won. What a customer.
Further into that. I'm almost done on this one. No. I believe it started in the state of New York. They lived in New York, moved to Chicago, and then homesteaded out here in Colorado. And Rockefeller would come and visit here and stay right at that Bromley house there. And they were just good friends, and they were able to get a few artifacts of the Rockefellers. They were given the leftover clothes that they were done with, and their opera jackets that we have so many operas here. Right? But maybe back then we could, an opera house there, we probably wore opera jackets. Yes. Okay, hi. Welcome. I am Mariah Cecile. Besides having a really incredible name, I lived an incredible life. I lived 102 years. That's pretty incredible. I was born to my father, Emma Bromley, and my mother, Anna Bromley, on January 20th, 1899. But no one knows exactly where I was born. Don't know how that can happen. Anyway, my grandparents, Margaret and Thomas, came over to the Henderson area from Canada in a covered wagon and settled the Henderson area. I was Emma and Anna's third child, but the first to survive. So I was the apple of my daddy's eyes. We lived at the Bromley farm, right up here on Bromley Lane, and vacationed during the summer in Boulder. We had a house in Boulder. My daddy, Emmett Bromley, lived a very affluent life. He was high up in the government, a state senator, But he also rubbed elbows with people like John D. Rockefeller. In fact, one of my very first memories of meeting Mr. Rockefeller was when he took me to school in his brand new shiny automobile. It was my first time in an automobile, so it was a big deal. We showed up to school, and it was just fun to drive up to the school and walk out in my shiny automobile with John D. Rockefeller. My mother, on the other hand, was the Belle of Platte Valley. That's what they called her. And she was a famed horse racing. They had horse races. Racing the horses. Everyone in town knew her, and she certainly knew everyone also. She knew everybody else. I grew up right here in Brighton and was responsible for the care of my brothers and also my ailing parents. When my mom passed, I was finally able to marry Charles Allen at the age of 45. But, yeah, she waited a while, or I waited a while. But the real love of my life was raising border collie puppies. I had raised several litters when I was alive, a skill which several of my family members continue to this day. When my father passed in 1922, I was only 18 years old. Before he died, he had acquired some significant medical debt from caring for my ill brother. He had also been involved in the construction of a building in downtown Denver, which had put him further into debt. It's called the Bromley Building, and it's still there today in downtown. So, in honor of my father's good name, I made it my mission to pay off all his medical debts, which he had acquired, and I did just that. I worked for Adams County, and I also did things like raising pigs and cows. Once, a desperate mother came to me, and she was looking for some raw milk for her ailing son. And later I found out this young mother, had married a Bromley herself. I was always taught to stay away from that side of the Bromley family. I don't think anybody has issues like that ever, but we did. But Lou Ellen Bromley and I became close friends. And well, let's just say the rest is history. That's because for years I was able to share everything I knew about the Bromley family and its history, most of which they barely knew anything about, like how my father and his brother Martin helped homestead this area in the early days. In return, Lou Ellen and Ken Bromley, a descendant of my uncle Martin, have shared this knowledge with the city of Brighton and participated in its continued legacy. So, this is the pictures of her, and this picture is a family reunion that I was at on the day we did the moon landing. That was in 1969 on the day of the moon landing. And I don't know how we got home to watch it in time, but we did. And then these are just the other pictures that she had of herself, of myself. Get back into character. So thank you for coming.
So, and that was...
was in a hotel run by the Bishops, late 1950s. was in the actual film. 2010, they were graveling on the east side of the Platte River down in behind where my shop was, where I grew up. And I knew a lot of the operators because I did business with them. It's got a machine shop there, so I worked on equipment. And they reported to me that they found numerous wagon wheels when they were digging, but the wagon wheels were destroyed before they actually found one. By the time they realized that they destroyed it, but one does still exist, and this is it today. And I took this picture at 9:30 this morning. And this wagon wheel I found. I say I found. We were down with family partying on the river one Sunday. Platte River, and we found this wheel. One thing I forgot to mention, in 1940s, the Platte River was flooding quite a bit, and it cut a channel straight through. So the two channels this way dried up. The one on the west side definitely dried up. The one that come around it by Brighton Road, that channel is still passing water. And when they gravelled it, they had to make sure it stayed there. So it's still running water today, and where it's coming from, I don't know. It comes up and runs around on the platform. So that's my connection to John. If you got any questions, feel free to ask. Try to answer them. If I can't answer them, I'll make up a story to some of my other people around here. Some of the other people, same way. You guys from this area? Okay, well, I'm Ken Bromley. Bromley Lane. What? Connection. Okay, I'm doing John Colonel Jack D. Henderson. County Henderson down there. That's his. John, and doing research, and get this way, I wrote it, I found several family connections to John Henderson. Anyway, John was born in Pennsylvania, early 1800s. Date and time unknown. A lot of his information is unknown. In the early 1850s, John moved to Kansas, joined the military there, and fought in the bleeding Kansas border wars. That's where he had obtained the designation of colonel. After the skirmish, he started the Leavenworth Journal. Very successful newspaper. He was a successful man. He was described as a tall, red-headed, boisterous man. While he was the editor, he was appointed committee chairman of the Democratic Party of the Kansas Territory. And I believe when I read, he did really good at that. Except for one problem. He got accused and prosecuted for stuffing ballot boxes and hiding ballots and counting ballots. John was prosecuted and guilty, sentenced to jail. Don't know why, but he was allowed to go to a party before he went off to prison with the escort of the deputy. Well, he met some young lady there. You'd say who, it might have been his future wife, I'm not sure. But anyway, he cut the strings on one of his shoes. Then they went out dancing. Well, her shoe fell apart, so she goes and asks the sheriff, can we step outside and take my shoes? Sheriff says, yeah, that'd be fine. I know John's honestly not trying to escape. So was he wrong? He got out the door, he was gone. So for a little while, we don't know much about it. Well, in 1957 or 8, he turns up. He's leading a group of Missourians with supplies to Denver, salt, coffee, flour, beans, mining supplies for the prospectors in the area. They get to Denver in the fall, and John goes to get feed for his animals, and he decides the price is too inflated, so he just turns them loose. In the spring, he goes out and looks for them, finds them, fat, healthy, sassy, still got his brand, so he rounds them up. Well, the story is that John was in a saloon one night somewhere in Denver, and they were drinking, and he said, "Hey, we got an island, we'll sell it to you for 2 kegs of whiskey." So he buys it. It's Henderson Island. At that time, Henderson Island, the river went on the west side of the Great Ground, on the east side up against Brighton Road. They're just north of the Bromley Machine Company was back years ago. That's where I grew up. Well, John was an entrepreneur. He got into the cattle business. He built a corral over by the tracks over East 85. He shipped over 2,000 head of cattle, 5960 out of there. On the island, he built a hotel charged for meals, which was unheard of at that time. He built a house for him and his wife. He built a blacksmith shop. He had a corral. He raised hay. And he had his trading post, and he sold the products to the prospectors crossing the river, because Henderson Island was the only place they could cross between the Cherry Creek diggings and Fort St. Vrain and Longmont. He was very successful. He bought 580 acres around the outside of the island by means, being said, unknown. Yeah, so that was where the town of Henderson got started. In 1860, John sold the island to Major B.R. Bradford, and I did not follow up on that. Well, John then goes and joins the Union Army back in Kansas. The Union Army, his war record is very spotty for here. After the war, he and his wife Amelia, they started traveling around the country. Amelia died in New Mexico, date, place still unknown. Seems to be my thing for that era. So he returns back to Pennsylvania area. And being an entrepreneur, he talked 18 other investors into coming west to Colorado, investing in gold mines. Why not silver? I don't know. But gold mines is what everything said. It's not the Henderson Mill site, but check that one out. Well, anyway, he was killed by Osage Indians. He was crossing their territory with loaded weapons, and they didn't like it. So they slaughtered the whole bunch in John D. 1877, the hotel burned. It's the same time era. A gal by the name of Anna Dixon, Senator Emmett Bromwell's wife. She was in her teens. She won a horse race on the island for $2,000, which she gave to her folks, and they built a house just north of Anderson, and it stood till E-470 took it out. It's end of that. In 2010, when they were graveling in the area on the east side of the river, cars were put on their equipment, and they reported to me that they found numerous wagon wheels. But usually by the time they realized they had a wagon wheel, it was too late. One did survive, but my wife, my family found somewhere around 2005 in the river. And this is what it looks like today.
That's cool.
That's the last surviving wagon wheel we know from that era. Any questions about John D. Henderson I can answer?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, glad you stopped by.
Sauerkraut, pickles. Eventually, through great business growth and financial success, My brother invited me out to live in Denver and join the company. He later stepped down to travel across the world, but it was I that he ultimately entrusted with his business dealings. And no better man for the job. Professionally, I was known to never miss a meeting, and was later credited by the Rocky Mountain News for, quote, developing the company's operations to a position of dominance in the Rocky Mountain region. That is because it was I who pioneered the early commercial food chain. Not only by bringing real industry to the area, but also by allowing local residents a sustainable source of food through these rough Colorado winters. Without a year-round growing season, there were several months of desolate cold and frost. In fact, the great citizens of Brighton were so dearly inclined to have us move our main headquarters here, they themselves raised $8,250 to absorb our moving expenses. That's around $200,000 in today's money. Well, I'm proud to say we went on to grow, manufacture, and preserve a multitude of local farm-raised vegetables, everything from vinegar to canned vegetables to ketchup and condiments. We moved our main headquarters here finally in 1916, a few years after my death. But the business continued on and eventually merged with the John Epsom Canning Company from up in Longmont. The Cooner Epsom Company lived on and prospered until finally officially shutting down in 1984, 132 years after its inception. So, even though I'm not buried here in Elmwood, many of those from the Brighton area and the ones buried here around me, I have touched deeply. You might say I am haunting them right now. Thank you.